How's it going, guys? Anfield here. Welcome back to a new video. So today's video I want to talk about armor and what sort of value and protection you actually get from armor, because that's important when it comes to World of Tanks, as they're tanks. You know, we're talking about armor here. Even the most lightly armored tanks are still armored vehicles. And we're also going to talk about the balance between that and penetration, which is obviously the counter to armor, is how much penetration you have. And it's important to compare the two. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I feel like a lot of people don't quite get the value of armor or understand it. And, you know, I still see comments where people say, oh, you know, you can just press the 2 key, referring to gold or premium rounds, and you can pen whatever you want, which obviously isn't the case, but I think it's worth talking about. I'm also going to talk about why Unicums use gold rounds, because obviously it's a topic that's quite controversial within the community. You know, they find it morally irreprehensible to fire any kind of premium shells. So I'm going to talk about that, and how Wargaming have sort of been balancing the two, and what decisions they've made recently that show that. And then also we're going to talk about how I sort of feel premium rounds should be rebalanced and things like that, which I have talked about in the past, so it's not going to be really anything new on that front. And while I'm sure there'll be that portion of the community that have got this far in the video and already disliked it, I hope that there are a few more of you that are a little bit more open-minded and at least understand where I'm coming from on certain things when I talk about how premium shells are currently balanced within the game, and where they're imbalanced within the game. So yeah, regardless, let's get into the actual video. So here's just an example, which is obviously something you might see a lot, where, you know, a Russian medium is firing heat. You know, that's the typical thing, like, oh, your Russian medium heat spamming gold noob, whatever, right? So in this case, you can see the E100 is not angling the turret at all. The only angle on the turret is actually that the road wheel is a little bit on the rubble, which does make the angle steeper and more difficult to pen, but the heat is still enough, and it's not a severe enough angle that it's going to trouble the heat all that much. I believe there's like 2 bounces in this, but regardless, I see people do this all the time in their super heavies. They sit and they stare at people, and then they get shot, and they're like, oh my god, you gold noob, you know, I'm getting penned. And they don't make any kind of effort to angle. They just sort of stare at the opponent. Now, angling isn't a guaranteed measure of protection, but what people don't realize is just because your armor isn't always going to bounce doesn't mean it's been completely ineffectual. And I'll show you guys when it comes to actual angling part of this. But you know, when you're angling your turret and you're making things difficult, you're moving around, your armor does so much more than just does it bounce, does it not bounce. There's a lot more into it than that. So same thing again, only this time the E100 is going to wiggle the turret, make it a little bit more difficult for the 62A to fire back. Now, you could leave it at a static angle if you had a perfect angle, but there's no real way to know that your angle is perfect. This isn't tanks.gg. You can't just tweak it and stare at it, you know. And obviously this 62A is stationary, but you know, you're not going to get stationary targets all the time. So in order to force bounces, you can wiggle your turret quite a lot. And this will confuse the enemy, because you know, if you're static angled all the time, which may be more reliable in a mouse than some other tanks, but you know, if you static angle, then an enemy can take a long time to sort of think about their shots in the build up to their shot. Whereas if you're constantly wiggling your turret back and forth between 2 minute angles, you can make it a lot more difficult. Now, you're not always going to bounce your shots, but it's important to remember that just bouncing the shots isn't all what armor is about. It's also about making your enemy take more time to aim. So obviously a 62A has very high DPM, just over a 5-second reload, which is very, very quick. But if you're wiggling your turret back and forth and making your weak points more difficult to shoot, or the what would be considered an optimal angle that the 62A actually wants to fire heat at your turret, they're going to take longer to aim. And that's kind of what you're looking for in this situation, is to minimize the amount of DPM the enemy actually has, because you're making it more difficult to shoot. So this is something that I feel like a lot of people overlook when they think about armor. And they just look at, oh, my armor is going to be penned every time, or is penned far too much, you know. In a lot of cases, you can increase the effectiveness of your armor, not by bouncing the shots, but by making your enemy take longer to aim, which is where armor's sort of value actually comes in. So in this situation, the 62A is spamming heat, but actually runs out of heat shells before it can finish my E100 off. You saw the difference between this set and the previous set. It's night and day. So, you know, obviously if you just stare at your opponents, yes, you're going to get penned. It's going to happen. You can't be lazy about your angling. Now, if you're thinking, well, that's all well and good, but the 62A should never be able to pen the E100 with its quote-quote 2 key. We will also get into that as well in a later part of the video, so don't worry about that. So one thing World of Tanks certainly has a lot of is RNG, and now I understand RNG on accuracy and penetration and why they have to be there, but I don't understand why it has to be on penetration. I think your listed penetration amount should just be your penetration amount. Unfortunately, we have 25% on that as well, which is a huge amount, deciding either side of what you're going to actually roll as a pen number, and that's kind of silly because, you know, there's certain situations such as here where whether I pen or not the C100 is all down to my RNG roll, which is silly. You know, I should either pen or I shouldn't pen. I shouldn't be. Let's see what the dice says. You know, which is part of the reason why Unicoms will also use heat rounds or, you know, APCR as premium rounds, because it mitigates and then prevents that amount of RNG from affecting you. When you're dealing with a standard round that is as low pen as E100, regardless of its small little buff that it got, it's not reliable to use the standard round. The other problem is, especially when it comes to E100, is if we have a gun with a really long reload and poor accuracy and low standard pen, the last thing you want is to miss a weak point because you may have aimed absolutely perfectly at the weak point, but even at this kind of close distance you miss because RNG makes you miss, and then suddenly you miss the weak point and you bounce, and then you're on reload for 16 more seconds. Not because you did anything wrong, but because RNG said, nah fam, we ain't doing this today. So this is why you'll see a lot of heat usage or APCR usage, whatever your premium round is to stop this sort of thing from affecting your game or your ability to carry a game. Here you can see obviously heat will punch through the E100's turret that's completely unangled with no problem. E100 begins to angle, it can start to bounce. Obviously the C100 is stationary, making it much easier to pen than it would be if he was actually doing some angling. But, you know, in this case, the heat presents a much wider weak point to aim at, which is the turret cheeks. So you don't have to worry about, is my accuracy RNG gonna make my shot miss the police bar? It's not such an issue. So other than RNG factoring in what round you choose to use, you also have the map design, and unfortunately far too many maps are corridor or lane maps where you're forced to fight your opponents frontally, which is not a medium tank world. That's a heavy tank and a tank destroyer world, and medium tanks are very, very dangerous and difficult to play in these kind of scenarios because you have no choice but to face these tanks frontally, and if you're going to use your standard round, assuming the heavy tank even has a weak point, you then have to expose for quite a while in order to secure the hits, which is not exactly reliable. So for example, in E100 you could sit there and try and aim at the hatch, but you're going to be exposed for a long time, whereas you could just use your heat and try and get a quick snap into the turret before he can retaliate with a much higher damaging shot. So unfortunately Wargaming need to do something about the maps, because as the maps stand right now, mediums need their premium shells, because if they don't have them, they just are completely uncompetitive because there is no way to flank. You can't wolf pack past a group of heavy tanks and tank destroyers, and even if you could, what are the chances that you can rally up some pubs to do that with you? Probably not very good, right? So unfortunately, this is kind of the situation we have. Now, if you had better designed maps that allowed much more flanking opportunities, you could certainly say that something could be done about the premium shells in that case, where the medium tanks are then able to flank, so they don't really need their premium high pen shells. So Wargaming's recent approach to helping super armored heavies that were underperforming, such as the Type 5 and the Mouse, was to sort of boost the armor a great deal. And I just don't really agree with this, because all they're doing is encouraging people to fire more premium shots at the tank rather than aim at any presentable weak points. Now the Type 5 Heavy no longer has any standard AP pen weak points from the front. The hatch isn't pennable. I mean, you basically have to fire premium, and the tank isn't even protected against premium, because if it tries to angle, it just presents a new flat surface. The Mouse is a different story, but I don't agree with the armor buffs to the Mouse either, and the reason for that is, again, it attracts more people to fire premium at the tank, and also the tank really didn't need that. What it needed was gun handling and DPM buffs, which it got, but unfortunately it also got the armor buff, so now it became the most overpowered thing in this game, because it actually, unlike the Type 5 Heavy, does a very good job against premium when it's angled correctly. But in the case of the Type 5, they're like, let's not buff the gun, let's give it an HE mechanic gun, which is boggles my mind. They want to make armor more relevant, and they give these super high pen, high damaging HE guns. You don't have to aim at all. I mean, you complain about premium rounds all you want, but those guns are way worse when it comes to dealing with armor. You can be side scraping, and a Type 5 Heavy is going to pen you for 600. It's just absolute silliness, and I don't understand the logic there. Instead, I think premium rounds themselves could be reworked to indirectly buff these tanks without ever actually having to touch their armor values, and so as a result you could have a round that does more damage but less pen as a standard round, and as your old style typical premium round having more pen but less damage. They don't even have to cost any more credits at that point, so that way if you have armor you're rewarded by tanks shooting you for a round that's going to do less damage. I mean, generally your premium rounds are different rounds anyway. It's like AP to APCR, AP to heat, etc, etc. It kind of makes sense that they might do a different amount of damage to the tank, so why not just introduce that sort of system? I can't really think of a reason why that would be bad for the game, but I mean, it's not like this is some unique idea. This has been tossed around the game for a while. There's been other options like limit premium rounds, but I think this is the best solution, and I think it best rewards people that have heavy levels of armor and that are angling correctly. If you're facing an opponent that has good armor and is angling correctly, that person should be rewarded by forcing people to try and pen him with a less damaging round. This kind of change would of course have to come with map rebalances, although we should be getting that anyway, because if you don't rebalance the maps and these lightly armored tanks are forced to fight in corridors and they're doing even less damage to these tanks, it's not going to really end well for them. But yeah, that's about it guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you found it interesting. Maybe you even have a new way of looking at things, but maybe you don't, I don't know. It's a controversial topic. I've never really shied away from controversial topics. I don't really mind getting the hate, so yeah. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. What would your approach to properly balancing premium shells and armor in the game be, or are they already balanced as is? Let me know, and I'll see you on the next video.